Hello everyone, another video coming to you today, and it is going to be about a movie that I feel is sort of underrated or underappreciated by the public. I think in particular why this particular movie is unappreciated by a lot of people is just because of the year it came out in. Now, this movie came out during the year where one of the Lord of the Rings movies came out. And if you know, Lord of the Rings is probably one of the biggest fantasy epics of our day. And so I think that movie was really, really looked at and sort of, glorified to a certain extent. And then a lot of the other movies that came out that year weren't really so much looked at because everyone was like, Lord of the Rings. But, I just wanted to briefly talk about this movie because, again, I like to think that, I'm not saying that this movie is better than Lord of the Rings. I'm obviously not going to even try to compare the two because they're just completely different. But they're just both unique in their certain way, and I feel like that this one was sort of underappreciated because it just came out in that year when everybody was looking at Lord of the Rings and instead not looking at Cold Mountain. Now, that's what since this is the title of what the movie's called, you might be wondering, don't you mean Brokeback Mountain? Wasn't there that movie that you're talking about? No. I'm not talking about Brokeback Mountain. I'm not talking about the two cowboys. No. This is a different movie. This is called Cold Mountain, and it is about a young man named Edmund who goes off to serve in the Civil War for the South. And basically, what ends up happening is the movie goes back into the past as well as towards the present. And as it's doing this, it develops the Edmund and his relationship with Ada, who is played by Nicole Kidman, and Edmund, who's played by Jude Law. And the thing is that their relationship is not really as very developed, I'd say, and that's because it's not really supposed to be. They are supposed to be two people who really like each other, even though they've known each other for like barely a good chunk of time. Because right when they start to get to know each other, the war starts, and then Edmund has to go off and fight. So they're basically separated a lot of the time throughout the entire movie. And it basically goes back and forth between Edmund and Ada and how they just deal with this whole war that's set upon them. And I found the movie really intense at times, very sad, very poignant, and I think it should just be a little bit more recognized by people because to me, I thought it was a decent film. I thought it was just, from just watching it, I could feel a lot of the emotions come out through the actors, and you got a sense of who they were. The thing is when it goes to Edmund, what ends up happening to him is he ends up being wounded at one point, and he gets a letter from Ada that says that she really wants him to, come back. She's suffering and pain. Her father died, and she wants him to, come back to her because, she just really feels that this war is tearing them even further away from each other, and she just wants him to, just give it all up, just come back. And what ends up happening is that's like kind of his epiphany, and he knows that, that this war that he's in is just really messed up and cruel and pointless. So he decides to basically desert. So once he's well again and he's fit to fight, he just decides to desert instead and try to go back to where his home is and where he met Ada, and then I guess just get away from everything that has put him up to this point of the war. And as he's going through this journey, he meets a lot of different people. He meets Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's in this movie, a big name actor who is in a lot of random stuff. And he plays a preacher, and he's kind of a preacher who's done some bad things, and if you watch the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. And he also meets up with Natalie Portman, who's a single mom having to deal with the fact that she lost her husband in the war, and now she doesn't have anybody anymore but her and her kid. So there's that whole story too. So as he's going through this whole process, he's trying to, get further back to where he belongs, and obviously on the way he needs like food and shelter and things like that. So he just comes across these people, and in particular the ones that stood out were, to me at least, were Philip Seymour Hoffman and Natalie Portman. And I think that they all did a good job in whatever of their character was shown. And the thing that you have to understand too is that during this war, there are these people who are sort of, I want to say, corrupt people who want to make sure that there are no deserters. And in those times, you weren't allowed to desert war, and you had to enlist. I mean, it was just what was required of you, especially in the South. And the South became very desperate once the war started to not turn into their favor, and they really wanted to make sure that they could, find these people and, capture them and take them back and put them in the war, because they were just so desperate that they would, do that. And the thing is that it became sort of like a money thing. You'll see at one point that it's done out of money. So when people, harbor people who are deserting, they're considered traitors, and if you don't turn them in, then you're considered sort of a traitor, and you could be shot and killed. So the whole point is to, distance yourself from them, and if, you do find deserters, to tell people. And at one point, these people who do turn them in are rewarded with money, and then you'll see this at one point in the film. Now, I find it really interesting how sort of that's how the villains are played out in this movie, and they sort of have this whole grudge with the other families and how they want their land, and they're kind of power hungry, and how they use that to try to make sure that everybody's sort of kept in line and that nobody messes with them. And I think that that's what really stood out too, was just how they would, use their cruelty to bring out the worst in what was practically in this war. And as far as the acting goes, I thought Renee Zellweger's character, who I will mention, is sort of helps Ada out with her farm, because once Ada comes into town, because originally her and her father are from like a city area, and then they come to the country in the beginning of the film, and then once her father dies, she like completely loses herself. She feels like she cannot do anything. And this farm kind of just becomes barren, and she feels like that her life is pretty much worthless because she can't do anything, and the money that she and her father had is not worth anything. So she just feels like her life is in a downward spiral, and even when people do try to help her, she kind of just is like, no, just leave me alone, because there's nothing you can do, So what ends up happening is that someone sends the servant, who's played by Renee Zellweger, named Ruby, to help her out. And so, as you'll see, is that Ruby and Nicole Kidman's character develop a bond. And as they develop this bond, you see how they reflect this sort of friendship, and that's pretty much their story and their side. And there's also other characters too, like Ruby's father comes into the picture, and you get kind of a sense of who he is. And then some of his travelers and wanderers that come with him, and how they get incorporated into the film as well. And what I also thought was interesting about this particular movie is I liked the music a lot. I liked that southern kind of, I think I want to say it's bluegrass, I'm not sure, but it has a lot of violin and banjo type-esque sounds to them. At one point, a lot of the characters end up singing of like sort of the despair that they're in, and I think a lot of country folk style music really reflects sort of that era of misery. So you'll see like how a lot of the characters are in sort of this misery state, and as the film progresses, you see how Edmund becomes more and more sort of lifeless, and how it becomes harder and harder for him to try to get home because of all these obstacles that he goes through and all of these characters that he ends up encountering. And then you see how Ada's life is sort of kind of redeemed in a certain extent with the help of Ruby, and how they are able to keep their farm and the land that Ada and her father had in shape. But you do see the sort of the thing that still kind of haunts her is the fact that she, can't see Edmund and not know anything about his whereabouts. And I thought a lot of the stuff that came out of this film was well done, and I really enjoyed it for what it is. It might be a little bit disturbing for some people. I do have to say there's a lot of disturbing scenes. There's one scene in particular in the beginning where there's the Yankees, or the Northerners, are trying to raid the southern camp, and basically what they do is they bomb it, and as they bomb it, there is this ditch that they end up invading in, and as they invade this ditch is like just muddy and very, still smoky from the blasts that they made, and it's very, very grim, just with all the mud, and then hearing people constantly scream. It's really, there is parts to this movie that are kind of disturbing and maybe hard for people to absorb. But I think that's how this time was. It was a disturbing time. It's probably one of the most brutal American wars we ever had, and it was literally people of our country fighting against each other. So when you think of that, I mean, there's one point where you'll see, if you like literally watch it, there is an African American trying to kill a Native American. I thought that was just so odd, just so fascinatingly odd, how people who were like treated so badly by this country, if you look at our country's history, and they were fighting literally against each other because of, for whatever reasons that they were on whoever's side. And it's just mind-boggling. So what you have to understand is that there's a lot of disturbing parts in it as well. Parts that sort of reflect the trickery of some characters that are completely, kind of messed up in the head. and you'll see this in the film, how they're kind of just really off, and maybe have a really kind of disturbing nature about them, and how Edmund tries to cope with that. But I think overall this film is it's just something that's not really recognized, and I think it'd be nice if more people maybe decided to watch this film, because it is sort of, it has some educational value by showing you how the North and the South sort of fought against each other, even though it doesn't really go into depth into battles or things like that. And it's more of played up as a love story. And I think that's probably why some critics get mad at it, because it's like, oh, why do they focus on a love story? Why is that important? And blah, 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 blah. But the thing is that a lot of that stuff, just, I don't think that makes a film bad just because that they want to have a love story. And I mean, this movie is based upon a book, and this book is a love story, plain and simple. It's a lot. I think it's a lot different actually from the movie, but the main premise is there. So I personally don't think it's wrong for Hollywood to take that approach and say, okay, we're just going to tell this story. Because you still get the really grim and real aspects of the war. You still get the whole idea of these killers who want to, band up deserters, and instill fear into people. You see that there. It's not just a love story fluff, I mean, I don't understand why critics are so, harsh on it. But it's not maybe that bad. I mean, it has decent ratings. So far, it's at a C at Rotten Tomatoes. And for whatever reason, some critics, that was literally some of the arguments that I read, just, oh, it doesn't focus on this, it should focus on this. Well, if you don't like what it's focusing on, why are you even bothering to watch it in the first place? But besides the point, I think it is a decent film, and I think it should just be more looked into, because not a lot of people have heard of it. And literally, when I asked somebody when it literally came out, I asked them, have you seen Cold Mountain? And the person said, oh, you mean Brokeback Mountain? And I said, no, it's called Cold Mountain. So I think that there's a clear, distinct difference between the two if you watch both films. And I haven't seen Brokeback Mountain, so I don't know. I've never been able to get a chance to get a copy of it, so no clue how that film is. But for what it's worth, I think it's definitely something worth looking into if you're interested in this kind of thing. I think it's something that can be recognized and appreciated. And it's very tragic, it's very heartfelt, it's bittersweet, it has its moments, and I think everybody in the cast did a really decent job. And I guess some people were complaining that Nicole Kidman's accent kind of drifts in and out, or maybe some of the characters drift in and out of the accent. I'm not really sure how that accent works, but I mean, it might be a minor complaint people have, but for me, I don't really care how they do the accent, just as long as they bring out the emotions. I think that's a little bit more important than the accent. But literally, that's really all I can say about this film. If you are interested or have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to ask. And until next time, goodbye.